Here we are on a podcast.
Nice. Another remote podcast.
Are we 3,000 miles away from each other? 4,000?
No.
6,000? I feel like I'm 6,000 miles away from you.
Not far enough.
No, someone's tired of the same thing every day, huh?
Bro, let me tell you what I'm tired of, upgrading Ember apps.
Oh, man. Yeah. I'm actually going to be helping my brother here do that soon. I've been pairing with him a little bit. It's cool, man. It's cool seeing someone working on like a real production app that's like a real app, I don't work on those anymore. But it's pretty neat. Like, it's just so funny, like the design stuff, like coding and design and clean code versus like, oh, this is like maybe not how I would do this. Like there's a route and it like hits like 10 different endpoints because like there's all these different, he works on an app that does like data geo tracking for like bikes and cars and stuff, and the way his like node server works, and it refreshes things every 5 minutes, and like so he has a route that loads all this data, and it like he did it all at once in like a single blocking request at one point, but it like took too long, so he kind of does it in like pieces. But there's like just a lot of code like in a route file, like whereas like a vanilla app wouldn't have that, but like it like works and it does the job. And it's like you can also just see like how those decisions were made, like when you follow the app and like everything that's going on and you're in that situation. And there was some good tweet about this recently, but
what you're saying reminds me a lot of Sarah May's EmberConf talk, where it's not about clean code or messy code, it's livable code
for sure.
Yeah, this is like perfect example of that.
Exactly. And like if you think about like he's a one-man show and he's got like 4 different services that he's working on at any given time. And so like when you balance like what would it take to get a single model hook to look a certain way, to make it like robust to fast boot and all that kind of stuff that's like so far down the priority list, you know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like it's nice to see that, and to see like the areas in the app where I felt like Ember and Ember's primitives were like helpful in letting him just get his job done. And then the parts that he will talk about that are like hard to like do the data loading stuff or the modeling, like where you're going outside of like normal Ember data conventions, or like where the abstractions like kind of fall down a little bit and you actually just want something lower level to get the job done right now,
Yeah.
But it's pretty interesting, man. So I need to help him upgrade anyways pretty soon. But
nice. Is he like taking you to lunch or something?
Yeah, exactly. But we had an interesting conversation in inside EmberMap Slack that was started by him actually, because he was having slow build times with Sass, and he was saying that was like such a good. He was like, I had put this off for so long, but he was doing that investigative work and like really cut down his build times because of there's a couple issues, like Sass was watching all of node modules, so it was like an include path option on like Ember CLI Sass that was looking at all of node modules, and it was like that was probably an instruction somewhere that was like, oh, I'm installing Ember modal dialog and I need to like include the Sass there. But there are node modules. Oh, if you just include path node modules, you can import directly from it. But then you don't realize the cost in terms of the build watchers and stuff.
Yeah.
I can't remember everything else. Do you remember everything else that was in that conversation that he did?
I think there was some chat about like he was using the Google thing, material design. And if like, does that need to be compiled? Or can you use like a pre-compiled version? And there was some good discussion about that, I remember.
Right.
So
right.
I think the answer was that they ship it as Sass, so it's good that your app compiles it.
Yep. Very interesting stuff. I know it seems like even in the React apps we've been working on, it seems like it's just inevitable that things don't work as smoothly or as fast as they do when you start a new app. Like I'm working on my personal site, like a redesign of my personal site as a Gatsby site, and already it's like sometimes the Chrome, the tab will crash because like hot reloading is like trying to do too much, and it's just it's interesting.
Yeah.
A lot going on there compared to just a Command R and a Rails app,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, hot reloading is so far beyond just hey, a file saved and sending something down a WebSocket that just says refresh the page.
Yeah.
It's like trying to rehydrate components. Also, too, it's like you as an app developer might just be doing something that doesn't play well with hot reloading.
For
like you have
sure.
some global state that you need to be reset, but it doesn't because the hot reload doesn't know about that.
Yeah, there's even times where you add a new hook, and then I get an error that says the amount of hooks in the render cycle has changed. You can't render this conditionally, or like this might be a bug in React, and then you refresh, and of course it's not a bug.
It's like as if your hook was hidden inside of an if statement that you just flipped to true.
Exactly. So then it's like, okay, so that's fine. I get that that's like a super hard problem, but like just don't do it then. Like don't fake me out, you know?
You need an escape hatch here. You need a way to just say, I want live reloading, but not hot reloading.
Yeah. I will say, like, I guess you do kind of get used to some aspects of it, like when I'm tweaking like CSS classes and like it just instantly changes. I'm like, that's pretty cool. Like it's just really fast in doing that.
Yeah. When I was working on the Mirage docs, writing MDX Markdown and just saving the file, and I mean it's as fast as you can save the file. You see the thing show up.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
But it still would be nice to be able to toggle this, because there are times where I'm doing those CSS tweaks or Markdown, and there's other times where I'm doing app development.
Right.
And so, yeah, I would like to switch between those two.
Right. Maybe if it knew like you were changing CSS classes or CSS styles or like just text content, it would just redo it. But then as soon as you go into JavaScript, like,
yeah, I mean, I don't even mind just saying like live reload true, hot reload false. Or I guess, let's think about state machines and reload method, live, hot, whatever.
Right. But yeah, pretty interesting, man. So yeah, you've been upgrading apps?
Yeah. Well, I've been trying to prep. Let me tell you about abstractions and why they're bad. I've been trying.
We love abstractions, man. It takes. You got to start a little egg timer when we start a new piece of code until we start pouring cement into every edifice, lock it down so we can make sure we never change it.
So right now I am chiseling out all that cement right now. So I'm trying to prepare a video for EmberMap, and I'm just playing with our nav, and we have like a really abstract nav. It's actually, you laugh, but it's actually really nice. We have the way where we have a contextual component where you render the nav, and then you just say, that contextual component yields out a bunch of link components, and inside the yield, you just say like link, and
it shows up in the mobile nav, and it shows up in the desktop nav, that kind of thing, right?
It takes care of everything. Like mobile is a pop-up menu that like when you click the links, the pop-up menu has to close on desktop.
I literally just built that in my React app.
Okay, so you need to revert all of that right now. One of the things I'm doing is I'm adding search to our header, and while the header is really good with links, when you get content that doesn't fit the abstraction, so a search box, it's like really complicated. And I kind of noticed like over the last 2 years, we kind of have been like breaking this abstraction, this header abstraction, because we have like some prop drilling. So one of the things is we have a way to render the nav without showing a login option. And I believe
for fast boot.
No, I think we did that. I think there was like a day that like our Heroku database like just ate it, and our site was offline, and I just needed a way to render the header without any interactive links.
I see.
So I think I like prop drilled the like is showing login or something like that all the way through this nav abstraction. Got you. And so there were like cracks in the foundation. Like right. This was kind of showing it, but trying to add that search box, it was just like, okay, like I can come up with a new abstraction for handling search across these two environments, mobile and desktop. But I figured, really like I just want to open my application template and see like if we're on mobile, render a mobile nav, and if we're on desktop, render desktop nav. And
For
those
sure.
are two completely separate components. And I kind of convinced myself of this because if you look at them, they are two completely separate navigations.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. When you're starting something like that, you just want to just start coding it like on its own, like without an abstraction.
Yep. So
is that what you did? Did you like open the mobile nav and just go there and start there? Like
No, so I did on the desktop. I opened the desktop and started there, but there was a lot like these components. Yeah, I'm trying to tell like the quickest story here, but there's a lot of abstraction here. I got to a point today where I want to try like a few different designs. I'm not really sure what the best design is here.
Yeah.
And so I was just playing with it, and I was to get these designs working, these design tweaks. I was just prop drilling too much.
Gotcha.
And so I started reverting it, and honestly, it's going to take me 3 hours to undo this, and that's in like the grand scheme of things, that's not really that bad for just rolling this back.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, man, abstractions are hard. On the flip side, it's funny, like I'm working on this little like the mobile nav for my personal website, learning like React Spring and React Reach Modal Dialog, and what else am I using? I think that might be it, and it's a Gatsby app. And just like we know from our Mirage site, like the Gatsby app has some constraints, some conventions around how it like renders components and stuff. Anyways, I'm not trying to make any crazy abstractions or anything. I'm just going, just building it, right? And it's like when you just build it, like React is particularly amenable to this because you can just build components. Like you can just create a new component in the file right there. You don't have to really think about it, which is great in the sense that you can just keep moving. But it's always like that. You get things working and then you stop and step back and like look at what you've made, and it's like there's just so many different. It's not abstracted, not in the sense that it's not like a nav that yields like a nav.link. It's not abstracted in the sense that like styling, animation, linking concerns, and layout concerns are all they're all mixed together. So if you're trying to understand something and you're looking at it, it's like it's really hard because like why is there a separate like toolbox? Like let's say I call this thing a toolbox where you click the nav and it like shows you like all the links, and they kind of like fade in and stuff. And some of those links go to like my social media, like Twitter and my YouTube, and then some of them go to like my projects page or my blog page, which are like internal to the app. And then for those, I need like a separate link component, because if you click on it, you want to like dismiss the nav and then navigate to the thing. But if you command click on it, you still want to have an href, so it's a link. And if you command click, it opens the right page in a new tab, right?
Yes.
Surprisingly complex for something that is like pretty basic. And like I've done this a million times, and it's still like a lot going on. And so like, yeah, I want to like render a component with like a link to like /projects and have all that logic there. And so like it was easiest to make a new component that took like a 2 property with like 2 projects that could be reused for both the href and the programmatic navigation using like the navigate helper.
So you
but like if you were just looking at this thing, you wouldn't know that. Like
right, exactly. So you're basically taking like the link to or link component, and you're just wrapping it in a similar API, but it also like dismisses the toolbox or whatever you call it.
Exactly. And it's just very hard. Also, like this thing happens to be a link component from Gatsby, which is the Reach UI link, Reach Router link, wrapped in an animated like function that turns it into an animated component so that like React Spring can work with it. And so if you're looking at this, you have to know a lot about what's going on. Also, like when I did an internal link originally in my header, like the toolbox kind of appears, and then you click on a link And I had this nice animate out thing as part of it, but like it would just go away, and it was like confusing. And I finally realized again that the header was re-rendering because every page had its own instance of layout. So then I had to add that like Gatsby layout plugin thing so that it's like an actual nested layout, and it's like actually always rendered. Like the header is always rendered once. And so that way, if I'm navigating somewhere internal to the site, I can first wait for the toolbox to animate out and then change pages.
So you wait for it to go away and then you do the navigation?
I did that and I didn't like how it looked, but so now I just kind of do them at the same time, so it transitions immediately, but you still get to see the animate out, because otherwise if it's rendering a new component, like the thing just gets unrendered immediately. Like for animate out to work, it has to be a persistent like component. And so, just like an Ember, basically, like,
yep.
Basically just like with Ember Animate, it's like a similar idea. But like we never think about a lot of this kind of stuff in Ember because the layout is like nested by default. All Ember apps have like a persistent nested layout. And so that was just another strange thing. But I just kind of like finished and I got it working well and it was great. But then you step back and you're like, you have to understand a lot about what's moving with like Gatsby and the Spring thing and reach router and command click, and like I know this now as I'm writing it, but I won't remember in 4 weeks when I open this up. Like I won't remember why we did that. Like if we look at code in our Mirage site, there's going to be things like, what is going on here? Yeah. And it's just like I feel like there has to be a middle layer where you can write abstractions in the sense that like it's not the kind of abstractions that you're just trying to lock someone down as much as it is about explaining like this is here because of this, Yeah. Like a comment.
We don't do those.
But it's just crazy because it's very easy to end up with like a 300-line React file, and like good luck trying to remember why you did things. Although like a lot of the tools are pretty common, and the more I work with React, the more comfortable I feel seeing certain patterns in the code over and over again. And you just kind of start to learn like, oh, you're splatting the prop, like you're splatting a bind here, and it's like being passed a style. Okay, like this is coming from that, and it's doing that thing.
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it when you said there's just so many concerns that are mixed. It's like layout, animation, navigation, all just kind of mixed at the same point. And that's, you take 3 different things like that, and it's going to make anything complicated.
Yeah. And it's like, I want to be clear that like, I totally believe that React was correct in terms of the argument that like a component markup and state are like linked, and so like having them conceptually as one thing, just like we do now in Ember, is like a good thing. To me, those aren't like different concerns, whereas like, or rather, they're like different aspects of a concern at the same abstraction level.
Yeah.
Whereas if you look at like what I wrote today, it's like when you see something that's like navigating to a route in your app, and also like wrapping a div with an animated div so that it can receive style props, like those feel very different to me. And that's where it feels like you're going to see code and not understand why it's there. Like, that's the part that I have a hard time with.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting, but the Spring stuff is pretty interesting, man.
You like it?
Yeah, I mean, it's still, I think it's hard. What I'm learning about a lot of the React libraries is that a lot of the stuff, like you read the docs or talks and stuff, they're talking to people who have been in the React community for a while. So like, a lot of the docs for like the latest version of React Spring, they kind of assume you know a lot about React, or even a lot about like the older version of this library, because like if you just start reading from the top, you're reading something about a transition thing and it's like very sparse, and then you have to go to like the old renderless version of the Spring guides and read the transition, and there's like a lot more there. And the new stuff is talking about how it's improving on the old API and how you can compose it with this hook, and you're just like, I just am trying to, so that was a little frustrating. But what was great about it was like it felt very much like learning D3, and that there's like a lot of examples. And like, man, I can't tell you like this, I know we've talked about this recently, but like when I'm learning something new, I want to get a win in my app with real code, and I don't want to I just don't have enough context to understand it. So I want to see the closest example to the kind of thing I'm trying to build, copy paste, and then go from there, you know?
Yeah. Yep.
And it's like, I can't say enough how much faster I learn that way than trying to read a bunch of stuff. Although I will say I do wish there was more docs in certain areas, because like it's kind of like leaving you hanging. For me, it's like a mix, but the examples are just very, very helpful, you know?
Yeah, it feels like these are, I mean, we've been talking about this kind of offline about the Mirage docs, but it feels like these are two different things. It's like the quick win, getting started, versus the like, okay, I'm ready to have a deeper understanding of what this thing is doing.
That's a great point. We should link to that Python talk because it was really good. What is it like? What no one tells you about documentation, something like that.
Yes, yeah.
And it was basically making the point that like, yeah, when you're in a mode of just looking for a reference, the other, if it's trying to teach you and give you an understanding, it's like working against you. And I felt that, you know?
Yeah, it was really good when we were writing our docs too.
Yeah.
It totally changed them. So
yeah, for sure. And now we have like a quick starts guide that's like just about like getting you kind of up and running, that quick win in the app. We're going to have an examples page with like lots of examples of like, oh, you're trying to mock out an API endpoint that looks like this. Here's the code that does it. Like a cookbook area. And like, I think those are really nice to have. Like I would have liked to have like even more examples in the Spring thing and just ignore the docs and like I eventually found something after Googling and finding an issue where the author of the library was like, oh, you don't need that. You could just do something like this. And it was like someone was asking about it, and it was really perfect. And I wish I had just found that earlier, you know?
Nice.
But it's pretty cool, man. I was like doing something actually pretty similar to like what I was trying to do with Ember Animated, where you have like a staggered transition. And I was like fading in the background, and then I wanted to like stagger in all the elements on the nav. And man, it's really interesting. Like it's super low level. Like when I first started with React Spring, I was like, all I want is like animated if. Like that's all I want, you know? It's so much easier. It's like I just want something like that. Why wouldn't they put that in this library?
Yeah, it's a quick win.
It is, yeah. But and so just to get some stuff like that, like some of it is crazy what you're looking at. You're just like, how is this the API? But you kind of keep struggling with it. And yeah, it's basically like super low level. So you just get like these animated values and they animate over time. They actually like change and re-render outside of React, but you don't really know that. It's just like, it's not like causing your component to re-render 60 times a second, basically. But conceptually, this value that you get back from like a use Spring hook is something that's like, let's say, changing 60 times a second with a different value based on how you configure the Spring. And then you can pass it in as like a prop to your components if you kind of wrap them in like animated mixed like higher order component thing. So like, let's say you had like a progress component that took like a percentage from 0 to 100. And yeah, you could like wrap that to some state and like add a button that like increments that state and it would like change the ring, right? Mm-hmm. Well, what you can do is use a Spring instead that goes from 0 to 100 and wrap your like donut component in like an animated thing to make an animated donut. And like, you don't have to know that at all. Like it just does it. And then you pass in like percentage, and then you pass in like, you bind it to like the return animated value from Spring, and then it will just animate like, and it looks really, really cool. Like it uses these really nice like physics-based curves and everything, motions that are derived from Springs, and like it works on like your React components. It works on like any like CSS style, and so it's pretty interesting, man. It's pretty cool.
Those like physics-based motions you're talking about, like does the library come with good defaults for easing and momentum and anything in that category?
So you don't even have easing, because easing is a concept that's like doesn't apply with the Spring. It's like derived from the values of the Spring. Same with duration. So there's no like Bezier curves. There's nothing like that. It's like the parameters of the Spring are like stiffness and tension and mass. And you set those, and then all of the other stuff is derived from that.
Oh, interesting. This kind of reminds me of something I heard you say about Ember Animated, where we were talking about like duration, which is in the library, and you were saying that I think it was like Apple doesn't use duration. Was it Apple?
Yeah. That's where this all started.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
So they don't use duration because the like force you use to push an object determines its duration. The duration isn't like some constant.
It's derived. Exactly. Yep.
So this library is like gives you all that.
It's awesome. It's seriously awesome. Like,
nice.
I'll wait until I show you this thing that I built.
Yeah,
like,
I know. I'm imagining the future nerd out.
It's super cool. Even my brother was impressed. Like, he was like, I can't believe there's a website, and he's like done like lots of really cool graphics programming.
Nice.
Yeah, those are derived, and the idea from the original Apple talk was like when a car stops, it's like almost imperceptible when it actually reaches a full stop. It's kind of like this, if you were to push a can along the ground, it would just eventually come to a stop, but it's almost imperceptible like when it actually stops. And in iOS, I think this was like iOS 12 when this first came out, or maybe iOS 10, it was like built into the UI and the OS at a fundamental level, so that the idea being like nothing in the real world ever is really like stopping and starting in some sense. And so when you're like pulling down a menu or opening Control Center or opening an app and canceling and going back home, everything should be cancelable. Everything should feel fluid. It's like fluid interface. I think that's kind of what it was called. And so that's one of the main ideas there. And they were basically saying that's like pretty opposed to the notion of like a fixed duration or a fixed easing curve. So like, yeah, dude, it's incredible like what you get by default from the library, because you literally just use Spring and you say what you pass into use Spring is an object, and it can be anything you want. So let's just say you want to animate like a x from like 10 to 50. And so you just say use Spring from object like x:10 to object x:50. Now you have an object that goes from 10 to 50, and it does it in a really nice looking way. So you could then go to your animated div, style equals opacity : and then like spring.x, like that would be it, like spring props.x, and then that would be it, and it would look amazing. And then like, dude, you can change the state. So like this is where it gets really cool with the hook. So like you have some state and your Spring goes from 10 to 50, but you could have some state that's like is open, and then inside of use Spring you could say like is open ? From is 10 and to is 50, otherwise from is 50 and to is 10. So like when you set state, you actually are re-rendering that hook is generating a new Spring, but it works even if you interrupt it. It's crazy, man. So like you can be going from like 10 to 50 and stop at like you're at 30, let's say. And then if you click that button that changes the state, like it's going to create a new Spring that remembers where you were and comes back like smoothly. So like I made this menu thing that like blurs out the background and then like adds all these elements. But like it does it kind of more slowly when you first open it up. But then when you click to dismiss it, it all goes away. And I'm just changing the actual Spring values, like the configuration of the Spring, like the mass and friction, whether or not is open is true. And like I didn't even know if I could do that, and I just like was trying it, and it was all kind of working. I mean, it was pretty impressive, man. It took me a while to like learn how the pieces fit together, but like I was really impressed by this library.
That's so cool. So the Spring itself doesn't like, tell me if I have this mental model right. It doesn't really care what your would you say mass, tension, friction. It doesn't care about those things. It just has a Spring, and you give it new values, and it animates that way.
I think you're getting a new Spring, like if you were to change the values. Like if you use Spring, you get props back, and it's like animated property. It's like an animated value, and it's how the value changes over time does depend on the Spring that you configure. It's just that Springs also have like a memory, and you can also like dynamically change the Spring or like create a new Spring and somehow it all just kind of works. Like,
Very cool.
it's just crazy. Like you can use like the state anywhere in the code, and it's like very surprising. So like, it's crazy, man. Like I can do like a transitions array where I have like, I want to fade in, like scale up and fade in 8 different items. And I want to do that like with a trail of like 50 milliseconds. So the first one's going to come in, and then it's going to wait 50 milliseconds, wait 50. So you have like a transitions array now. That's like 8 different springs that are delayed from each other by 50 milliseconds. And then like the question is like, how do you apply them? Well, like it's super low level. Like they're just changing values. So like you could call like transitions.map and return like an item and customize it. I wanted to do was like fade in this part of the template, then this one, then this one. You can just do like transitions array 0 dot props and splat it onto your thing. Transitions.1. So like, in Ember Animated, I was kind of trying to like fade in this part and move this part, like different parts of the page, and it was hard if like an animated value was nested in another one.
Yep.
This is just like literally giving you an animated value, and you can just put it anywhere in your JSX. It's like a really, it's confusing, but like once you get it, you can literally do like whatever you want with it, because it's hard to do basic things, but once you learn it, it's like, it's very, very powerful. It's very cool.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah. And then it was nice doing it with the reach dialog, because the dialog is basically like a renderless component. It's not. It renders something, but it's basically like a completely configurable like low level like modal component that you can like add your own styles to. So I wanted it to be like full screen and like a blurred background to make it look like that kind of frosted glass on iOS. And like, yeah, it was pretty neat to just have the portal stuff. I didn't have to learn anything about React portals. It does that under the hood. It does like trap focus and prevents the body from being scrollable when the modal's open full screen. And all of that was taken care of for me, but I was still able to use React Spring to animate like different parts of the template. So it was pretty amazing.
I mean, that's awesome. That's like an awesome composability story that you can take these 2 libraries and tie them together.
Yes.
I just before we wrap this up, so you talked about like how easing is derived from like the physics of the spring. Are there like certain physical values of springs that just naturally look good?
Oh yeah, because you were asking about like the defaults and stuff. So I know duration is derived, and like it's not even a concept that you even work with. I don't know if they would say easing is derived from the spring, or if easing as a concept doesn't even make sense when you're talking about a spring, because easing is like this notion of like how the values of a curve changes over like time 0 to time 1.
Yep, that makes sense. I mean, I definitely buy the duration argument, so I think I can buy the easing argument there.
Yeah. So either easing is also derived, or like it doesn't actually make sense to talk about easing. I can't remember. But back to your question about defaults, like the default spring is great. It's like if you go to the homepage of the site, that's like what all those are using. But then they have like they provide. So you can configure those 3 properties, and it's actually pretty simple too. They have like an example on the homepage, and you can just like increase the tension to 100 and see what happens as a result, or the stiffness or whatever. But then they also have like 6 different like named springs. So they have like wobbly, stiff, molasses, slow, default, and then like something else. And so it's pretty cool. Like when I first did the fading in thing, it was like you could make it like really dramatic, and then you actually go and use it. And I was like, it's like if anyone ever shipped a website that did this, I would like scream at them. Yeah, you can just see someone like, oh, this is so awesome, and it's like they're gonna be just looking at the menu items popping in and just be enraptured and enamored with how amazing it. No, they're gonna be pissed off because they're trying to link somewhere and they're waiting on your slow as molasses animations to fade in a damn link.
I love it.
But yeah, I picked kind of slow for the fade in and kind of fast or stiff for the fade out, but then I ended up tweaking them myself, and it was nice. It was nice that they had those, and then that I could then tweak them further. So yeah, man, composability, real composability. This is like actual composability. This is not like composing global singletons for no reason.
Yeah. Yeah.
We had an interesting conversation because this idea in React of like prop drilling and how to deal with it, and folks were saying that like people abuse context. I think Michael Jackson in particular was talking about this on Twitter, and we've also seen like Dan Abramov talk about this as well. He had a tweet or like a GitHub issue from a couple of years ago, maybe, talking about how this is like the kind of way they put it was like this was one of the most underused. Children is like one of the most underused features of React. And on the one hand, I was like, maybe they're coming from a place where like I could actually see how people could miss children. Like you as a new React developer, you could miss seeing a use for children. Mm-hmm. It made me appreciate yield in Ember because it's like a first-class concept that's called out, whereas children is literally just another prop, and it's obviously super important, but like it's lost. Whereas like I think a lot of the Ember teams we've worked on, like a lot of Ember developers we've paired with, you're going to see a lot of yield in an Ember app, like a lot. Like I mean the default template is to like yield. So like when you make a new component, the default thing is to render children basically, and that's not true with React unless you do it explicitly. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Okay, I follow now.
So like if you like, oh, let's extract this panel and like, it's reusable. It's like a card and it's going to take content. It's a very natural way to do that in Ember where you like copy and paste this. You create a card.hbs file, you throw it in there, and then you remove this content that's specific to the page and replace it with a curly yield. Like I think a beginner Ember developer would do that. But to do that, I think what they were saying, why it's like one of the most underused kind of features is like it would be if you were refactoring a complex template or a JSX function in React, you would just copy paste the JSX, the state, and put it into like a homepage card component. But it wouldn't be by default like a reusable component. It would just be, a chunk of that's pulled out.
Yeah, I guess too, like yield is probably more, it's like a better word. It's like more more intention revealing. Like
for sure,
I'm yielding back to the thing that's invoking me. So I think that's a plus. Also too, I know at Ember NYC like a year ago we did kind of like this like show and tell where everyone got up and kind of showed what they were working on all these components. And I think every single component or every single app that someone showed had a component that yielded out. So I have no problem buying that. Like this is something that Ember developers are all doing and they all understand.
Right. That's not. I wouldn't say that people in Ember don't use yield enough or understand how to use it. It's like something you learn pretty early on.
Yep.
Maybe it comes from the fact that like one of the downsides in Ember is like it's harder to make components than it is in React, because in React you can just like grab it and throw it in a function right there. But maybe one of the upsides is like when you're creating a component, it's going in like this global component directory, and so you're already thinking how to like reuse it. And again, there's like trade-offs there because like we make component specific. Sometimes you need like a structural component. You're
not selling me.
No, I mean I'm not trying to sell you that it's a good thing that we have to always make global components. I'm saying maybe that is one of the reasons why when people make components in
we're
Ember,
actually thinking about this.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a bigger ask.
Yeah, exactly. I think it would be good to come up with some sort of term. So back to this post from Michael, the video from Michael, and also the post from Dan. I think it would be really good for the larger community to have agreed upon terms for like structural components, like components that you are extracting a component just structurally. Like it belongs in this one place on this one route. It's just that whole route's component has become like really large and you just want to break it up.
Site header.
Site header. There's one site header. Dashboard. There's one dashboard. The thing is, like, you pull it out and you make it a function, and by default, like, you don't add any arguments to it, because you add arguments to a function when it needs to change, like when the things need to change.
Yes.
And you don't when you don't. So like we've talked about this in some of our EmberMap series, and you had a really good example that you brought up, like when we first started kind of exploring this concept, which was like the console log. We have console.log message because the message is what changes. But like if you always had to write log and then you pass in a console and then a message as 2 arguments.
Yeah, or you're writing like a print statement. Like you don't ever configure where the thing gets printed because it always gets printed to the screen. Like you wouldn't teach this as a programming concept to someone learning how print works. You would say, oh, print your name and it shows up on the screen. Like that's all you need for a very long time.
Right, exactly. So like in Ember, this comes up a lot with, we have prop drilling as well, where people move components, extract components, and then we kind of, the way we put it is we feel like one smell is, you see like user form, and it's like first name equals first name, last name equals last name, email equals email. And it's like, why are you passing all of these things? Clearly this feels like if you wrote a function that did the same thing, and you like extract, if you were like refactoring a big function, then that would be weird, like to call a function with like all the same arguments, and like the extracted function is literally only doing one thing and it's only used in that one spot.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And two, we would just say like, you're passing in all these values, just pass in the user object.
Right.
But not only that, like the way we can show you that this is right is the question, well, would you ever pass in a first name from user 1 and a last name from user 2? And the answer there is always no. That would be a bug.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the other aspect of this conversation, which is like whenever you add an argument to either a function or a new prop to a component, that's an affordance that you're giving other developers and yourself in a few weeks. So it's a signal to them that here's a way it can be customized. So like when I see a link component from reach router and it takes a 2, like I know that that's meant to be used with like different 2s, but it's not meant to be used with like different routers. Like the router is an ancestor. Link works under a rendered router. Like it doesn't take different routers. If there was a router arg that I had to pass in the singleton router that existed as an ancestor in my tree, that would be a bad API design because it's telling me something that's not like really true, which is that this thing is configurable. Like really it's meant for this one singleton router. So making it an argument would be stupid. Like that would be bad API design. But like that's kind of what some of these arguments were coming off as, where it's like you have a single route page specific component like a dashboard that renders like a sidebar for the dashboard in the main area. And you have this prop drilling problem. And so a way to solve it is by making it so that like the user who's rendering the dashboard renders like the 2 things that are only going to be the only things that are ever there. Basically, you're making like a yield and you're making children configurable, but they shouldn't be configurable. So it was just kind of a weird thing. And you were saying, that it's like this confusion between like singleton values and like composability. And it's not about composability.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to like, we've seen this in Ember. Like we've seen folks in Ember. I'm going to talk about like why you shouldn't use context in Ember terms. Like we've seen folks in Ember make services, put a bunch of functions on those services, and then inject those services everywhere. Right. It's like there was route action was a popular add-on at one point, and that's kind of the same thing. Like that's what's going on there.
Right.
And this is more. This gets you in trouble because you're basically like just poking holes every which way in your application,
right?
And getting access to everything. And so I think like
there's no natural boundaries with the hierarchy.
Yeah, and this is where you want to tell that composability story. It's hard to talk about this abstractly.
Yeah,
so, but
that's how I feel. I feel like like the compositions story. Just show me the code. And like, would you rather work on an app where you can just like use auth and get the current user in any component that's like the global single user, or one where like you're arranging different components just so to pass in like it just, to me, it's very, very clear very quickly which app you'd rather work on.
Right. And this goes back to like the composability versus singleton. Like current user is a singleton in the context of most applications, at least in the applications that we work on.
Yeah, 99% of them.
And so we don't need that to be composable. Just like when we write console log, we don't need to pass a screen because we know like we have a screen. We don't need to configure that. And so, yeah, I think when you have singletons, you do want to lean towards context, towards services.
Yeah.
Because these things are global contexts. Just use context to describe context.
They're global concerns.
And this fits well with your site header that you start putting into its own component. Like that site header is still a global concern, so you don't have to pass things to it. You can actually wrap that in a context, and it's not you're not abusing the system by doing that. Right. Now, if you have a bunch of like, I want to save a user, and I'm going to make a context that has a bunch of save user functions, now you kind of are abusing the system.
For sure.
This is where, again, it gets hard. We need to see the code, but generally that's where we see this pattern kind of fall apart.
Definitely. But yeah, I think when I was first learning React, how you wire up a provider that has its own state, that has its own methods, that lets you encapsulate logic the way we would on an Ember service, and then give like Leaf components like access to that state in those methods. It took me a little bit to understand that. You like create context, and then you create a new component that renders a provider and then children inside of it, and that gives you a new space to do all that. And then you can like use context, via the hook, to like access it from different places. Once I learned that, I was like, oh, this is like basically now I have like an area that's kind of like a service to do stuff in. But I almost feel like React could offer some more sugar over that single case, because context is more flexible. That's why it feels a little awkward, because it's actually more flexible than Ember services are. You can have like multiple contexts. You can have like them scoped to a sub tree of the component hierarchy. So that's like really cool. I actually haven't used that yet because I haven't worked on like any complicated like form that would need something other than local component state to manage that. But there could be. I'm guessing that most legitimate users of service of context in React apps is probably global contexts. And then there's also like the really like the 5% or 10% where like you need it for like a subtree and it like works out beautifully. Like we've needed in Ember apps before where we have like a local service. We wrote a little add-on that did something like that, and that was great. But like where that backlash is coming from, I'm guessing with Michael and Dan, is like people using it in the way that people can abuse Ember services. But like I almost feel like if there was a blessed way to do a truly global singleton version of context, and it was a more constrained API, it would let everyone talk about it with more clarity. And it would be like, okay, you're writing an app that has auth and a current user signs in. Use the React, global context here. Yes. And boom, that's it. And, as long as current user is a global concern in your app, it makes sense to use global context. And that's it. And it's like, now if you're putting user save form actions for the settings page in a global context, you're like, that doesn't belong there because that's not a global concern. You're like writing route specific page logic. You should just use composition or whatever, right? You should use this other stuff.
Yeah, that's a great point. And also it eliminates these whole like, oh, you introduce bugs because you had like this implicit implicit context where you had current user.
Yes.
And then you move not current user, like you have some context, and then you move your component out of that context tree, and you have this implicit bug where it goes away.
Right.
But in the case of having like an actual true global singleton, you can never, it's like implicitly you always have a current user because implicitly like this is a global current user.
Yes.
So you don't have like this like, oh, you should be more explicit because you can move this out of the tree. You can't because it's a global.
Yes, exactly. And then maybe they would get, dependency injection. And then you'd be able to like stub out services and write tests for whole apps and like all sorts of beautiful things that we're used to from Ember. No, I do. It's like React context is like their version of dependency injection. That is what it is.
Yeah. Maybe it's like a rule. You could say like if you're working on a React app, like you should, I think we would be if we had context and it was at a global level, it's like one of the, up before our app truly gets rendered, our like application component, whatever we're going to call it. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's okay, and we don't need to think much about that. But then if we ever get in a spot where we're seeing a bunch of like subtree contexts, we can pause and say like, okay, what are we doing here? Why do we need this? And there probably is a better answer through composition here.
Right. For sure. No, from what I've seen, the React apps I've looked at, and like the Gatsby starters and all that stuff, usually there is like a separate place where that you're rendering your like app component, and like here's where you put all your providers, and you have auth provider and router provider and all of those things, and those are just as a little barrier for you to like keep you making sure that they're actually like rendered at the root, and therefore you can just assume that they're always going to be available for every component in your app,
Yeah.
All that to say, I do want to be clear that like learning about composition and templates, that's kind of what we call it, like composition and templates, which is basically what Michael was talking about in this video, like composition in the render function, is like super, super important. That's like leveling up as an Ember developer. That's like as a UI developer, basically like understanding how to end up with the experience I had where the reach dialogue and the use Spring stuff, that was like composition and templates. That was a beautiful example of that. Like renderless components, having uses that you hadn't foreseen yet, and how to design things like that. All that stuff is super important, but flexibility comes with a cost. And when you're just starting to build a new app, if you feel pain from prop drilling, it's not that. Composition is like solving a different problem than that.
Yes. Yeah. Composition. I mean, you can't. I don't think you can build an SPA today without understanding this. Even things that are simple like pagination, like it gets so much easier when you have these components that compose and can yield state to each other. So yeah.
Right. And it's good that one good way to learn this is by like using good libraries and like learning, oh wow, like I didn't have to ask this library author how to make the modal fade in because they don't control fading at all. They just gave me a React component, and now I can go install a fading library and ask them how to fade a component. But like I'm fading the modal component, and it's a well-behaved component, and so I can learn all these lessons here just like this. So
nice little smell test there.
Yeah. But man, it's pretty interesting. I think just back to our whole kind of theme of this, it's like I really do miss high level abstractions, and there is part of me that's like it's easy for me to go back and forth with like people could get a lot more done if they didn't have to piece all these parts together. But on the other side, it's like once you learn the tools, you feel kind of more powerful. And like also, I just knew that I was never going to be told no trying to make this specific version, which is basically like if you on the iPhone, if you pull down the top right and like the control center comes up, I was kind of using that as inspiration. And I knew I was going to be able to do it. Like I knew I wasn't ever going to hit a spot where like the abstractions weren't going to be right. It was just a matter of finding them. So it's kind of a cool feeling.
Yeah.
And like we were talking again about some effects stuff and on Twitter and Ben Lesh, who I follow on Twitter, who used to be in the Ember community and has done some Ember, he's done some Angular, he's done some React. He's been tweeting about using hooks recently, and it's felt very similar to some of the stuff that we've been going through. Also, some folks who've been using Mirage have been saying, like talking about the async parts of React and like dealing with like async route handlers and stuff like that, state that lives kind of outside of like your render function and how to think about that. Anyways, Ben was saying like using some of the hooks to do what he was doing felt low level. And I think he had some back and forth with someone. Maybe it was Dan, maybe it was someone else, but he was basically saying like, it feels like we're early. Like I get these pieces are here, but like building something is very hard. There's a world where you have the higher level abstractions built on this stuff that enables people to build more faster. But right now, a lot of it feels like use is mounted ref. Like what the hell am I doing? Like seriously. And somehow I keep making that damn hook.
Hey, look, instead of typing this, you just type .current.
Yeah. There you go.
throw your hands up in the air.
I'm glad I didn't have to learn about objects.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, so it's been fun. We'll see. Let's see. What else was I... we have a Cypress quick startup with Mirage, which is pretty neat. So if you happen to be listening and you've tried Mirage.js before outside of Ember with Cypress, perhaps with Vue or React, we have a little guide up on the site, a quick start. And so it's pretty cool.
It's awesome. And just, maybe this will be fixed before this is published. The guide was written for Vue, and it works really well with Vue. We took a whole Vue app and added this very simple Vue app, but still. Mm-hmm. I think someone read the Vue guide and tried to apply it to a React app and ran into issues. And so we got to sit down with that person and see what they're doing.
Yeah, I think they just had some questions, but I do think it was working. It's just a Cypress command. I don't think it has to do with...
That's exactly the way I feel too. But maybe they're using some React stack that...
Gotcha.
There was some funny stuff going on.
Yeah.
I don't...
It's pretty crazy. There's a lot of moving parts there because like Cypress is rendering your app in an iframe and communicating via some message passing thing with when you're like running... like authoring JavaScript in your Cypress file and then it's running it in like a different, I don't know. It's crazy.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
It reminds me about a lot of the things that I love about Ember testing. And I feel like it is the next iteration of Ember testing.
Yeah. Interesting.
I really
That's
like
cool.
it. Yeah.
It seems like it's for people who think kind of like we do about testing.
Yes. Absolutely. High level. I mean, they even say like they use a term end-to-end testing a lot. And I think there's a better version with Mirage in the middle.
Right.
Because end-to-end testing is really difficult. But they give you all these like helpers to like, you could like spin up a staging server and then hit that staging server with like a reset command. And that's not really how we use it. Like we'll use Mirage in there instead.
Right.
But yeah, very high level. Like when I click this, I should see this, and then seriously awesome APIs to make that happen. Syntax is a little strange, but
a little strange. They don't use async await. It's kind of like what Ember used to do, and I really like when Ember switched to async await.
Yes.
But the other thing is like I think we're gonna have to write some guides in Mirage. I think it'll be fun too. We'll kind of get to flex our opinions a little bit, but Cypress. People who have been doing Cypress, I think, are used to like waiting for like named like requests and like aliasing a network request and like waiting for it to complete before moving on. In our minds, that's very leaking. It's like leaking implementation details into your test.
Yeah, if you change the API request from like / articles to / notes, should your app break?
Yeah,
and it's like
user don't care. Yeah,
user doesn't care.
Or even someone was like had it running against a backend and wanted to switch like one test to Mirage, and like that was just another example. Like the test actually depended on a certain aspect of the network request, and if they wanted to mock it out or something, like that shouldn't be that. Yeah, it's like a brittle test. You know? I think there's a good solution. I think different of the commands, like the Cypress commands, like getting a button and stuff, will like retry a couple times. And so if there's like a loading spinner, wait for it to go away and assert that it's there. So I think there's some good stuff there. But I think we will need to write about it and say like conceptually, you will access Mirage and modify the server in your test to like create resources, but like the back and forth of the JSON is like a detail, and that shouldn't be affecting your test.
Yeah. For some reason, this doesn't feel like, this is something we'll have to explain, but this doesn't feel like
hard bridge to cross. It's not going to be
right
a hard fought battle or whatever.
Where with the folks that shallow mount components,
yes,
that feels like, okay, we gotta gear up.
Yeah, we're going to war.
Yeah.
Yes, I know. Yes, I know. There's still people out there who love unit testing all the things, and yeah, I think it'll be fun to do some talks and writings about it.
Yeah. Yes.
Because that's probably one of the things in software I'm like most convinced about. Like I'm skeptical about a lot of things and whether all these paradigms and all this stuff. But that's like, I'll die on that hill, man. I will die on that hill. Like, I need, no matter what I'm writing, I'm going to stop everything I'm doing until I can write a test that's like, given 3 movies on the server, when I visit the homepage, I see 3 list items. Like, that to me is like the only thing that matters.
I mean, why do you write tests to begin with?
I mean, that's a good question.
And why do you, like, what is, like, why?
That's a good question. Personally, it's because I know how easy it is to screw things up. So, like, I'm thinking about, like, my recipes app, and I just want to know, like, I like it because I can change my app and refactor it. And I mean, honestly, if I have to think about it, that question, like, I love being able to merge a commit, and if the test pass, like, CI redeploys my site, and like, I don't have to think about it. Dude, I haven't worked on so many parts of EmberMap in like months, and like, we can let like Dependabot merge dependency updates and just redeploy it, and that's amazing. So to me, that's having a regression suite is like, for these kinds of UI tests. Now, again, we've talked about this before. Like, I write lower level tests in Mirage that help drive design, but like for UI testing, for like these UI apps, for me, it's the regression suite, man. It's got to be.
Yeah, I mean, what happened? Like, okay, so you had said, I said, why do you write tests? And you had said something like, you don't want to screw things up, or you want the regressions. Like, who pays the price when you screw things up?
On that level, yeah, as a user.
It's a user. So how should your test be written then?
Yeah,
like if you go back to I think you can kind of like, just if you start with why you write tests, you can very quickly get back to, you want to write these high level tests. Given these 3 movies, when I visit this page, I should see this. So
yeah, I mean, programmers, we care about. I was just watching this talk that was like about functional programming in 40 minutes, and he kind of put this thing in a funny way. Programmers care about the code. And in functional programming, like, you don't have no side effects, right? Like, you've created the rules and constraints to the system to have like these pure functions and have no side effects. But why do we get paid? We get paid for side effects. Like, the user only cares about side effects. So to the user, they're not actually even side effects. They're effects. The user literally only cares about the report being printed, the data being updated in the database, the pixels being rendered on the screen. The effects are literally the only thing that the user cares about. That's why we get paid, to make effects, to make software that produces effects. So I thought that was interesting based on what you were just saying, which is like, who do we care about in the user, and who does it matter for? Programmers care about the code because we're working on the code. And so it's easy for us to want to care about how it feels to work with the code, and to want the code to be better, and to write unit tests and stuff like that. But ultimately, we're in the effects business, and so that's important too. And arguably, that is the thing from which all other important and valuable things derive. So that's why that suite is like the most important suite, I think.
Yeah. I just want to dig into something you just said that I've been thinking about a bit recently, and I think there's like really there's almost like there's like a separation here where you have like people that are building apps for users and people that are building libraries for developers. And I think when you're building a library that other developers are going to use, you kind of find yourself in that, like, well, your users are other developers, and they care about the code. Right. And there's like this emphasis on API design and the code. And this tends to be like, even like from a testing point of view, you're gonna test like the actual code. So you're gonna render like your components in a bunch of different states and make sure they all behave correctly. Where like on the other side here, there's like people that are writing applications for end users, and this is more like these UI tests, these effects that you're talking about. And I think a lot of times we confuse the two. And I think people that are like celebrity programmers are more on the library side. And so I think app developers look at those libraries and say, how are these libraries doing it? They're writing reusable code. And so my app needs to work like this.
That's super interesting. I think that's a really, really good insight. It's easy to generalize lessons from a library space into your app, but they're actually very different beasts.
You have 2 totally different users. One is like the user that's trying to print the report, and the other is like the user that's trying to compose a bunch of components and
Yeah.
the way at the end of the day you want to write things that make the job easier for the user, but
Right.
but they're two totally different users. Like they're interacting with the software in two completely different ways, and that's
Yep.
going to change the testing story, the composition story.
That's
Actually, let me rewind. Not really the composition story, but it's going to change the testing story and the way that the software is interacted with, the API design.
The way the composition changes is that your users, do they need the thing to compose or not? If you're writing Reach UI components, like you absolutely, that's like the most important concern.
Yeah.
And if you're writing an app, most of the time that's not. Like your users most of the time are not composing parts of your application. Maybe some really complex parts they are, like a WYSIWYG something builder or something like that.
I was just thinking that, like if you're making some like front page style like website builder, it's like oof, you're either in the best of both worlds or the worst of both worlds. I'm not sure.
But no, I think that's a really good point, and I think that's a super interesting point, man. Because like, who are the people who get elevated in tech a lot of times? People who are at writing libraries, are good at API design, are talking about all that stuff. And what about the people who are good at building apps? Like that's different, man. I just had this thought, like if you're talking to me about some general tech truth, like, what's going to make me listen to you? If you have like a form library that you work on, because if you write forms, then that tells me you're actually building real apps for people who are like actually saving data. If you just show me 10 different tutorials for React or whatever, and they make a to-do app that doesn't save any data, that doesn't interact with the backend, that doesn't actually do anything, it's like, I feel like that's such a good filter, right? Like if you have a form library, or like you're talking to me about forms, like you're a real app developer, you're an actual app developer, like you're actually making software for like human beings as opposed to, you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's funny because I think that's like one conclusion of this, but I don't want to say that like, oh, library developers are just so divorced from like app developer world that they don't know what they're talking about, because I think
we're library developers, so hopefully there's some salvation here.
Yeah. I think that we can go back and forth, and I think that most library developers. Didn't Ed say something about like how much harder it is to build a library? The graph of complexity.
Yep.
So I think that if you can build a successful library, you certainly have the tool set to build a successful app.
Yeah.
But the hats you wear are different.
They're different. It's also that there are problems that you encounter building a really complex app that are not actually served by the same principles that serve building a really composable library. For example, like dependency injection, or like I was thinking about Rails. Like when you make a Rails app and you install Devise, you get a global like current user helper, and like part of that is because as your app gets like really, really complex, like if everything remains as explicit and composable and flexible as possible, your shit becomes really hard to understand because everything is being passed around and takes a parameter, all this stuff, right? And so
wait, it's not that because everything's being passed around. It's because in order to avoid everything being passed around, you app developer invent crazy new abstractions.
Yes. Yeah, that's true.
And that's why it becomes hard to understand.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so someone who's building an app and reusing things and it feels different to me. Like the kinds of problems that you run into are not, obviously there's so much similarities that good strategies of how to make like reusable code is going to be useful, but like they're just also just different things. Like they're just different in a lot of ways.
I wonder if there's like,
it's like, sorry, just to sneak this in, I saw David Korshard, who created XState, and he likes to talk about state machines on Twitter. It's like really, really interesting stuff. And someone was asking him about like a forms solution and should use this or that. And he was like kind of saying like, he kind of dismissed it and said something like, oh, or you could just treat it like every other component in your system because like it's all about state, and like state machines are a good way to model any state, and it's nothing special about forms. But then you look at like an app developer who is like building a complex app, and like obviously forms in every app we've worked on, every consulting project, forms are their own beast to enough extent that they merit having their own area of the code, their own abstraction, even their own strategies for testing because of how complex they get. So that's what I mean, where like yes, it's true, like state machines might be a great way to model any kind of state. It's also true when something as complex as forms are being just growing in terms of how much they dominate your app, and you're going to need its own specific strategy to help even further, even more than something like a state machine would give you.
Yeah, absolutely. And like as app developer has to have a different model here, because forms on the apps we've worked on, forms need to be consistent with like the branding and just the way they get rendered. But they also need to have abstractions to make them configurable.
Flexible,
because, Yeah, because I'm going to render this form for this type of user, this form for this type of user. I also want to reuse all those same components on like this totally other form and this other side of the system. And so, yeah, it's you can't just say, oh, you do it like any component, because when I'm writing a link component in my app, like generally there's only one way to render a link, and that's all. Like I don't really have to put a lot of thought into that.
Unless you wrote UI link to with Sam Selkoff back in the day. Then you have a lot of thought.
What?
Then you have a lot of thought.
Then you have a lot of thought. Yeah.
And it only works if you have 1 or 2 models, not 3.
Hey, actually, that is not. I don't think I've ever had more than 2 models. So that is not. I mean, seriously, this might be like a good real world example of this. That's what we're talking about. But like, I don't have more than link tos with more than 2 models, so that's totally fine.
Oh my goodness, man, that's funny. We will have to make a video soon of like rewriting some of the linked stuff with like modern Octane, renderless, like router service, all that stuff should be easier.
And to like part of going through some of these refactors that we kicked off the episode with, man, having to be aware of what a component's tag name is. Like component JS tag name is just like total curveball. Actually, I really haven't been bitten by it that much today, but it's always like, oh, I gotta go check that file and see if it's tagless or what's in there. So
well, we should wrap up, but by the time this comes out, your video should be up. I think it'll be a free video, and it was a pretty cool thing you did. You added like a infinity kind of loading thing to our video page on EmberMap. EmberMap, if you go to video, you'll see our series up top, which are like mostly paid videos, and then below that you'll see all of our free videos, and there's like a lot of them. Up till now we were only showing like 10 or something, and we used this load records component, which is based off of the work we did in Storefront, and lets you kind of just render in the template that like we need to load these 10 records. And then we wanted to make a scrolling thing, and you had a really cool actually composition example where you were able to use like a scroll in view component that we had to say, if scroll in view and show more is true, render the next load records component, and like iterate over that and just keep rendering other load record component with the page and offset set. And that's a great example of composition, right?
Yeah. And this was I don't know if there's like you'll be able to really apply this to a lot of the apps that you work on, but it was definitely a situation where I have like this tricky pagination, and my instinct is to go off into JavaScript and start making a bunch of arrays and maybe like computed properties and like getting all the pagination stuff done in JavaScript land, because it's tricky. There's the scenarios that came up were tricky to deal with, and I was able to do everything in the template. And usually when someone says I was able to do everything in the template, I'm like, oh no, there's just going to be a bazillion helpers all over the place.
Yeah, it could be abused. But 10% of the time when they say that, you're like, they might have nailed something here because you know that you have some guarantees maybe that you wouldn't if it was just some imperative JavaScript code.
Right, and that's how I felt in this video, and I really wanted to force myself to not go into JavaScript and do it all in the template, and I'm pretty happy with the result. I think I did this like 2 years ago, and I went off into JavaScript to solve a similar problem, and that is already showing cracks. So I'm
you leveled up.
Yeah. No, I did. I feel like
a new way to think about it.
Yeah. There was definitely stuff in this video that before I started shooting it, I wasn't even aware of. So yeah, it's
that's very
exciting
cool. Yeah, that's great. I can't wait to watch it. So yeah, if you want to check that out, head over to EmberMap after this. It should be probably one of the earliest new videos that we have.
Yeah, it will be out next week.
Cool.
Nice.
All right, everyone. I guess that wraps it up. Goodbye from sunny Florida, man. It's like 75 degrees here. I've been like coding out back and like just watching the dog run around, and I know it's not the same in New York right now.
No, it's 4:17 in the afternoon right now, and it is dark out.
This is all natural light. This is all natural right here.
Yeah.
That's depressing. Well, get one of those vitamin D lights. Maybe we can program it. Get a React programmable vitamin D light for the winter months in New York, and we'll have a use effect bug, and it'll just be like flickering, and we'll get vitamin D overload, and then
we'll die from vitamin D overdose.
And we'll get to blame React. We'll get to sue React for it.
No. See, React is just going to tell us that we weren't using the right hook, and we didn't have the dependencies right, and we weren't thinking about this as a side effect of state. So.
No, they're gonna say that they're just a view library, and that was a that was a separate concern.
There you go.
All right, before this gets any worse, we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.